I'd like to introduce you to Ian Hunter from New Deal Studios. It's a big honor that he came up here today, and I'll explain why. I mean, through New Deal Studios, he's worked on Iron Man, Dark Knight, Spider-Man 2, Inception, and I think actually I heard him point it best, building the miniatures as well as blowing them up. So all that fun stuff you see on the screen, a lot of it is Ian's work, and it's a big honor that he's here. And more than that, he's very much involved in immersive technology. So it's an honor to have him as a keynote, and please give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you to Andrew in the back who got the presentation order for us. So, actually, to let you know, we had Book of Mormon playing in Los Angeles some months ago, and I didn't get to see it, so I actually came up here and saw it last night. You guys playing there. But that aside, yeah, so I'm one of the creative directors and supervisors at New Deal Studios, which is a Los Angeles-based visual effects company. We're primarily known for doing visual effects, miniatures, practical effects, and that experience has led us to do much more photographic content providing for studios and for different clients. And because of that, we do a lot of features, commercials, TV. We've actually branched out into doing our own IP, so like every good company should. And to that end, my business partner is actually directed to Westerns in Arizona, and when the VR opportunity came to us, we of course latched onto that and have been working to try to create some VR content. So how that came about was we were contacted from something called Stan Winston School of Creative Arts. You'll notice that at the bottom right. Stan Winston School of Creative Arts is an online school that teaches creature effects, character development, makeup effects. They do all sorts of webinars and online courses using artists to explain how to do that kind of work. And they share our building. And they were approached by Jaunt VR, which has the Jaunt VR system, which is a 360 3D camera system for what we do with it. You know, what could we find that we could create with this system. And Stan Winston School doesn't have, they don't have the stage or the facility necessarily to create the content, but we share the space with them. We're associated with them quite closely. My producer is named David Sanger, is best friends with Matt Winston, who is the Stan Winston's son, who runs the school, so it just seemed natural for us to get involved with them. So what happened was, John came to us and asked us to come up with something that was a narrative done with VR. We decided, let's not do one, let's do three. So we decided to work with them and create back in May, first Black Mass, then The Mission, and then Kaiju Fury. And these are all narrative VR experiences that we're creating right now. They've been shot. Mission is actually pretty close to being finished. It needs to be color corrected and sound, all those other things. Kaiju Fury is still being edited, and Black Mass is also pretty much finished right now. So, because we've done a lot of photography, and we've actually shot 3D, regular cinematic 3D for features, and we've shot the live action movies, it just seemed natural for us to go to the virtual world here. But let's talk about where the virtual and world sort of gets divided into two, where it actually crosses over. Normally, or oftentimes you're talking about VR, you're talking about synthetic CG created content. That's where games come in. Where you're creating in a 3D space, an environment, and then you go into that 3D space with a virtual camera and you're able to move around in it. And that's been around for a long time, as we know. But the live action part of it is relatively new. And there are several systems out there for recording live events, and you know, we're showing them, you know, so we can watch them on our headsets. The difference is that when those started initially being done, it was just to record an incident, or record an event, or record a concert. You know, anything we could do to put a camera in a location and see it, what really happened in front of you. As a, for instance, sort of jokingly said when they came to us, they said, "Yeah, we got all this great, you know, these demos and stuff." And I said, "What? You got like guys on BMX bikes and pool?" It's like, "Yeah, we got guys on BMX bikes." Cool. It's like, "Yeah, well, that's kind of natural. You want to do something like that, skiing or, you know, surfing or something like this." So you want to try to find these different physical events and record them and see them in the VR world. So the next logical thing to do, the next thing that we jumped on doing was, let's do storytelling. Let's do a narrative. And as nice as it is to see, you know, a circus performance or you know, a concert or something like this, that's one way to watch that event, and it's fine if you know, if you want to sit there and watch that for as long as you want to. But does that really engage you very much? And we thought, well, if we could tell stories, because that's what we come back from, is the background of storytelling and working on features. Let's see if we can use this VR technology to tell stories and what is involved in telling those stories. So we used the same system, John's system, and we were using prototypes that they had built. And it's we have a 14 camera system, 12 around and 2 on the top. And so you get a fairly, not quite a sphere, but you get a fairly good, what's 3/4 of a sphere? Not a hemisphere, it's more than a hemisphere. The bottom section in this particular case is open. But that's, you know, you don't normally look down at your feet anyway. So for the most part, using the system, it does feel like an actual person standing there and able to move around all the way. And so we set up to shoot these with the system and do it as a narrative where we're telling a story. And the first one we tried was Black Mass. So Black Mass is directed by Greg Plotkin, who is going to be directing the next, I think it's a Paranormal Activity movie. And he's an editor. He comes from doing a lot of those horror movies, so he's some natural choice to do Black Mass. And Black Mass is a story that takes place where we try to take a first-person experience and utilize that to show this VR narrative. So within Black Mass, you are seated, you are wearing a hood, the hood gets pulled off, and you are basically the first person within the scenario. So everyone dresses you, looks at you, hands things to you, you know, does all the things that you would expect, like sort of in a game environment, and that's how Black Mass was dealt with. And Greg, of course, you know, coming from an editing background, knows when you can use quick cuts and things to sort of affect the audience's perception and scare them. In the case of Black Mass, we were looking at how we had to deal with, I don't want to say limitations, but some of the conceits towards doing something as a first person sort of narrative, sort of like the old Hitchcock movie, Rope, where you had to think that was all happening in real time. In this case, if you're subjectively in the middle of the room and people are coming up to you or addressing you, you know, how do you do transitions? How do you get around that? So there are things that happen in Black Mass that are, you know, intentionally transitional pieces, like lights flickering on and off to give us an opportunity to do a cut. The hood goes back on, which gives us an opportunity to change locations. And so these are the things, these sort of devices that were being used by Greg to create the story. We shot this over 2 days at our stage in Silmar, California, which is in Los Angeles. And we were going to use a church to make it like all really creepy, but the problem with the church, that's our stage right there. The problem with the church was Black Mass. It's a satanic ritual stuff going on, and the churches weren't really happy about us thinking about dropping goat's blood everywhere, and little things like that. Not real goat's blood, fake goat's blood. But so just the idea of having to move there and not be able to control the environment precluded us from shooting at that location for this first time out. So we decided to shoot our stage instead, where we had a lot more control over the space. As you can see here, this is like one side, 180-degree view of the set. The rest of the set's addressed on the other side also, because when you're dealing with a 360 3D environment, you have to build a 360 3D environment. So coming from a film background, we're normally used to looking one direction and locking off our camera and dressing that space. But in the VR, we have to account for everything being around us and dress behind us. So that, of course, had its own, led to its own kind of difficulties and complications. One of which is that normally when you're making film, for instance, right now, if you look around us, there's a couple of cameras recording what we're doing. In the 360 world, of course, actually our camera is the central camera that we're recording everything on. But if we had lights that were outside of that were visible in that 360 world, they would give away the fact that we're making a movie. So lighting becomes an issue, and so the lighting for this set for Black Mass had to be integrated into the set itself. So practical lighting actually became quite important. One scene we're inside the warehouse, we have some fluorescents hanging. Those fluorescents became our primary lighting source, because you'll understand a fluorescent light being in the scene, if it's on, turns out that's the best way to light our set. But also you'll notice in this picture, there's a lot of lights. Those are actually going to be hidden behind some set pieces. But these other lights are lots of candles. It's a Black Mass set, so we use a lot of candles to give us our lighting cues. So that's something to keep in mind when dealing with shooting this stuff, is everything's seen from 360 degrees around. Your lighting has to be hidden or integrated into the set. The set has to be built completely around so that you don't see off of it once you look around. And the other thing, of course, is that you can't see your crew. So, for instance, this is the warehouse section. You'll notice that there's a hanging lamp and those fluorescents I mentioned earlier. That's providing our primary lighting. And we're looking through a hole in the set. Go back to this one for a second. So that hole was drilled strategically throughout the set to give Greg a place to look in while he was shooting, so he could hide behind something while they were directing. Because, again, directing normally, you would be standing there with a camera, maybe shooting your actors, getting them to go along. But in this case, we couldn't let the crew be seen. We couldn't let the gaffer be seen. We couldn't let the drips be seen. No one could be seen because we see all the way around. So in order to do that, there's quite a bit of blocking required. Blocking is setting up the scene and having people go where they're going to go and time where they're supposed to be standing at a certain time. So quite a bit of rehearsing was going on in order to get the actors to be in the right places at the right times so that they could basically act on their own without having a director there to guide them along. Now, one of the things that we found also, I mentioned this, if you guys saw the talk about, before lunch about storytelling, is that really good actors are good at that. They're good at blocking, good at improvising, good at sustaining a character and staying in a scene. And because we're shooting in VR, we don't tend to cut as much, and so the shots are much longer, and so they need to sustain their action quite a bit longer and remember their lines. And if something does flub up, they need to be able to improvise and cover themselves and keep going because rehearsing, setting up, and then rolling in the VR world typically is about 3 times as long as it would take in the regular 2D world. So if we're shooting a commercial or a feature or something where we're looking with the camera in one direction, we've got to set up, we can roll camera, we can get that shot, we can then move on. But in VR, because so much is happening and we have to cover so much of the action within that one shot, it just accumulates in terms of the time to set up, rehearse, and actually record the take. So it's about 3 to 1 in terms of how much more time it takes in the VR world. I'm reading off some prepared forms. Pardon me. One of the things about that is that, so you have to rehearse a lot more. You have to block things out. You need to record at least one take and then watch it again and see where your blocking sort of falls apart and redo it. So there's a downside in terms of how much prep has to be done. But the plus side is that once you start doing takes, your takes are longer. You're actually accumulating more footage for a given amount of time. So you actually start eating away more of your script that way. Now the shorts that we're working on are, right now they're only about 5 or 6 minutes long. We're not sure how long someone would be able to stay and watch a narrative like this. I think it's going to come to the point where you could actually just watch a full feature this way, but for now I think because it's relatively new for people to watch this kind of content, where it's, you know, the audience is a passive member who's involved in this. How long do you want to stay in that world? When do you want to come out of it? So right now we're just playing with the short content to see how we can sustain it. But you'll see this is right here. He's directing our actress. That's some of that fake blood we were talking about earlier. And we have this door, roll-up door, and of course that's how we close, we get in and out of the scene. So you'll see the one side is very well lit, our camera's going to be in that side, and on the other side it's dark. So we can open this door, which is blackness, introduce characters, remove characters. These are all these sort of devices that we have to build into the scene in order to introduce items that we normally would just cut into something. You know, cut to a different angle, someone comes in, cut to a different angle. A character drops a line or something like this. In this case, we have to sort of deal with this like a theater. I mentioned earlier, when we were talking about theater on the ground, where you have a full set and it's seen from every side, and there's action taking place in different parts of that scene, and they all have to interconnect. That's where the blocking becomes really important, is that as a new character comes in, they engage with the primary character, then they leave. And it all has to be timed, it all has to be choreographed very carefully, because these takes are quite long. So this was, again, like I said, a first-person sort of setup where Greg set up the scene, set up the camera as if it was a person in the scene. We're talking to them, we're engaging them, and we're rehearsing quite a bit, and then shooting it. And also, one of the I wouldn't say it's the restrictions, but you know, right off the bat, I said, well, you shouldn't move the camera. Moving the camera is going to be difficult to deal with, so let's figure out a way to do a narrative that has a locked off camera. So virtually every shot in Black Mass is locked off. There's one time we do actually move the camera, and it's actually pretty dramatic when it happens because you haven't seen it moving before. You're sitting there and think you're stuck, trapped in this chair, so you're used to, for the most part, being in a fixed position. So when it does actually move, it is pretty jarring because you're sitting there not moving, but you see yourself moving. And in fact, this is the other thing that's going to happen, as you know, with VR, which is your inner ear tells you where you are, where you're oriented, if you're upright, if you're laying on the side, if your head's turning, things like this. If the visual cues that you're putting out are different than your inner ear is telling you, your brain starts getting confused, and that's where moving cameras can become an issue, which we found out later. So, but let me see if that, here we go. So this is Greg going over a little bit of that.
Says, oh God's way, worse than I ever thought. Jake is pulled away, door slams, most of it.
Try to advance a little bit and realize that it's
It's my name.
They just try to go forward.
Alright, Violet.
Rolling. Alright. Camera check for the actual
So yeah, Blank Mass was a lot of fun. I didn't have much direct involvement in it than I was there observing it, and that was my stage space that we were using. But it was done very much as a creepy sort of horror movie style. And like I said, we sort of had this restriction, not restriction, but notion that we couldn't move the camera around. It was much better to have the camera all off, it's easier with stitching, etc. And then we do one very dramatic move in Black Mass. And just the fact that it's the only move in Black Mass is actually quite jarring, because up till then you would have expected you're going to be sitting locked off and your body's telling you you're sitting there. And so when the camera does move, and it's a very dramatic dolly, it really throws you for a loop, because you know you're not moving, but you see yourself moving. And so that the experience is pretty dramatic. So after that experience, and you can see what we had to do in terms of having to build 360 views, having to hide the crew, having to build lighting in, etc. Based on that experience on Black Mass, we decided to go out to our next mission, if you will. It is The Mission, which is a World War II drama directed by my partner, Matthew Ratzner. And Matthew decided right off the bat, let's push things a little bit. So we both grew up watching World War II action-adventure movies like The Great Escape or Kelly's Heroes, things like that. These are character-driven stories that have a lot of hardware and a lot of action, and we wanted to apply those sort of cinema tricks that you would expect to find in a World War II drama, but use the virtual reality camera system to see if we could tell that story. And so he decided, can't move the camera? No, I'm going to move the camera. Right off, he says, we'll start moving the camera. Can't get within a certain distance? No, we're going to get within a certain distance. We're going to break those lines. And we're going to push this as much as we can to try to tell this in an exciting way. Can't have a cut. All the scenes have to be, full length, and they all have to transition from one end to the other, some natural way, like this, we're going through a door or something like this. No. I think we'll make cuts like you would in a movie. If you need to cut to something, cut to something. I think the audience is used to watching movies and used to seeing cuts occur, so we will put cuts in where we need to. So these were the things that he set out to do when we made the mission, to see if they would work in this space. The other thing too is that Black Mass was done as a first-person POV movie, where you're subjective inside the movie. You're being addressed, you're being looked at, etc. The Mission, Matthew decided that we don't have to be completely subjective. We can be objective. We can be planted in the scene, but not engaged in the scene by any of the characters. So within the mission, the camera is definitely within the space that the characters are working in, definitely in the action, but we're not being addressed, we're not being looked at, for the most part. There are some subjective pieces. He mixed back and forth between just being an observer and actually being a participant. So, as you can see here, we're sort of out in the boondocks. And in this particular case, instead of being in a stage, we decided to shoot this, being a World War II drama, out at a location. But we had to find the right location. And again, the same issues, which is with seeing 360 degrees around, so we can't see modern artifacts that we wouldn't expect to see. We don't want buildings, we don't want telephone poles, actually quite close to this location of a freeway, so we don't want to see those things that would be distracting for multiple viewings by the viewer. So we had to find this location. We found a ranch in Petaluma, which coincidentally was run by a German guy who had lots and lots of World War II gear on hand. And was a bit of a World War II fanatic. So co-producer on this, Vicky DeMay, found this location and knew these guys were great actors. And so they were all gung-ho, or whatever the German equivalent is, to shoot this. And so Matthew made a few trips out there. Matthew is he's got the glasses and the hat next to the tank. And so Matthew went out and made a few reconnaissance surveys of the location and scouted it. And we used that scouting to block out, before the crew was there, where the action was going to take place, where we would put camera, etc. Also, you'll notice that's David, who's standing in the middle, the tall guy. That's my producer. He's always good to have around because he can look over the top of things and make sure there's nothing that's not supposed to be there. And then to his left, on the left side of the screen, wearing the white shorts, that's AJ Rotano, that's our UP. Now AJ is kind of a short guy, but that comes in really handy because, okay, there's AJ, actually with a Steadicam rig with the jump camera on top of it. And we found that if AJ ducked down and used the camera the right way, we could actually Steadicam shots with the jump system. And he was pretty much invisible because this particular camera doesn't see straight down. So the camera system you see standing there, he's got to start the system up. He then has to run away. Those guys in the background have to run away. And then what we're left with are actors in their uniforms and AJ, who's able to do Steadicam shots. So that was the great thing that we found we could do with the system was we could rig up. There's a Steadicam in the foreground there. We could rig this camera and shoot it and do moves, which we were, I wouldn't say we were told we couldn't do moves, but the general consensus was don't do moves. But why not do moves? It's a movie, as Hal Needham, the late Hal Needham said, he puts movement into action. And if you're making a movie, you want to move the camera. So we decided we would move the camera. One thing we had on Black Mass was we were able to mic our actors and get really good sound. On the mission, we were out in the field, so we were trying to figure out what we could do to get the sound. Now, the jaunt system has its own, record sound also, which is great. But we decided we always wanted to have a backup, which is to have sound recorded right from the actors. And we thought, well, if we have the right sound guy, maybe we could dress him as a German soldier and be out there with his kit, and he would be fine. So we had a bunch of sound guys we normally use in Los Angeles. We would have done this normally with, but we went to Petaluma and hired a local guy to do the sound. Great guy, great at sound. He's about 7 feet tall and had a huge afro. Couldn't get the helmet on him. We thought maybe we'd put berries on him, have him duck down, look like a bush or something like this, but it never really worked out. So to work around that, and work around the fact that, again, we can't see the crew when we're shooting. If you watch the picture, conveniently there's a small German bunker that seems to move around from scene to scene, which is a small set piece we built out of wood with camouflage paint and netting on it. And it was actually something we could move from set to set and duck behind and actually direct from. Because again, we don't have the luxury of having, being able to look through the camera while we're shooting. We have to sort of put the camera out there and go for best guesses. Now, one thing we did do, so that's it sitting on its stand. So that we could see what we were doing in real time as we were shooting, we did take a GoPro and attach it to the Steadicam rig, and then Matthew had a tablet, and he would watch AJ as he was doing his takes. Now we're not seeing the 360 view, but at least we're seeing the same sort of primary camera. If you notice the jaunt camera, there's a green lens on it. That's the sort of primary direction you're looking at when shooting with the jaunt. And so we would take the GoPro and point in the same direction. So at least we could sort of get a sense, real time, what was happening when we were shooting. With the jaunt, once you shot a take, you can then download the tape, reprocess it, and watch it, the low-res version, make sure you got the tape. But while we were shooting, we wanted to have the ability to watch what we're doing, so this is sort of a way to do that. One of the things that was interesting was, coming back to what we could do with the camera as far as motion is concerned, we played a lot with what kind of motion you can make with the camera. What we found was simple dollies are very good. Pans don't really make a lot of sense, but you can do them. But they, you know, you do the panning, you do the looking around part. So pan doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you're shooting with this system. But dollies, lateral dollies, or in and out dollies do make sense if they're done at an okay speed. If they're done at a speed that is like you walking, if you're walking along, your head, by the way, when you walk, even though you're going up and down, your eyes pretty much kind of track a lot of that out, and your brain reprocesses it, so you don't really notice that there's a lot of bouncing going on when you're walking, because your brain just as you're walking. It's one of the reasons I hate handheld cameras in movies that make you feel like you're really there, but in fact they make you feel less you're like there because there's so much artificial motion. So we didn't want to introduce a lot of artificial motion. We used the Steadicams because that felt smooth, that felt natural. But back to that inner ear issue, once you do something that on the video or the visual that is different than what your body's experiencing, it can really throw you for a loop. And so, for instance, AJ did a scene, I watched the full cut, where he walks into the scene with the Steadicam, and then Matthew yells, "Cut." So what happened was, he's walking, it looks great, cut, and it turns like this. Well, when you're watching it, what happens in your head is, your head stays stationary, but the image is going like that. And immediately you want to vomit, because it's too jarring, it's too dramatic. You wouldn't, that's not really happening to you, so you go, this is not happening, this is dramatically different than my body's telling me I'm experiencing. This is killing me. So what we found was we couldn't do really jarring moves. We couldn't run. We don't want to do like dramatic tilts and things like that because your body's telling you that it's not happening. And when you see that happen visually, it throws you for a loop. Except we found that was actually quite useful when we had to have a German punch you in the face. So there's a scene in the movie where you're being interrogated, and this is where we switch from being an observer to being the subject. This guy, the bruiser, like punches the camera, and we actually took that instant to do that and actually use the camera motion to impart that kind of sensory overload that you're not supposed to do because you're being told that's not really happening to you because your head's saying, I'm not doing that, but your eyes do, and you accept it. And so it's a dramatic moment where that effect is actually quite useful. And so that's what we found with motion as far as the camera is concerned. So the Steadicam was adapted for using the jaunt. We also did another camera rig. Oh, there's AJ again. Notice AJ's kind of short, which is useful when you're shooting a camera like this. The other rig we built was for the opening, which is a parachute coming down. And again, like I said, this is mostly objective. You're an observer, but the opening is actually your quite subjective view, which is you're actually riding a parachute down to the ground. So what we did there was We built a mount for the jaunt. We put a counterweight on it and a pole with the straps. We actually got a parachute and rigged it with, in this case, we used some nylon rods to give it some stability. But then we hung it from a 60-foot construction crane out in the location and then dropped it. And because it was a parachute, it caught air and slowed down, which was really cool. So it actually worked as it was supposed to. So that when you're watching, you're actually able to look up and around, and you're falling with this parachute at real time. And at the bottom, we had some actors who were acting as they should, who had been previously dropped in. So there's another parachute dressed across the tree. So those are the things we did to sort of set the scene, and you buy that you're actually in this parachute because we're actually dropping in real time at real speed and doing what it's supposed to. And then we weren't done with moving the camera around, so there's AJ again being strapped to the back of our Petzer tank, and we decided we wanted to show the POV of a machine gunner from the back of the tank. Because let's face it, when you've got an actual authentic German, or actually Czech, I guess, tank in your hands, you want to shoot it as much as you can. So we strapped him to the back of this tank and drove over a barricade with a bunch of guys jumping out of the way and explosions going off and seeing the point of view of the machine gunner. We had to get a lot of reenactors to be in this show, and a couple of authentic stuntmen. I think the guy in the foreground, though, I think was a Burt Reynolds stuntman or something like that. He's an authentic German stuntman from a 70s Clint Eastwood movie, not quite from ours, but take your can. So yeah, we attached AJ to the tank. Now the tank did shake quite a bit, and there's some stabilization that we're having to do to make the shot work. But overall, it worked pretty well. The tank is nice and big. It's not too terrible, and we're up high enough that we're not so close to anything that we're getting some jarring motion in front of us. But all the problems in terms of having to come back and stabilize the shot to fix the stitching issues, to us they're worth it because we've got this really dramatic shot, which is a little wide back of the tank with a machine gun going off. So it makes it worth it. Here's some of the, this is actually going to be during rehearsals. We actually shot some of the action going on.
Martinez, who's popping up?
That's it, sir.
Must come down over there.
Real machine gun. Real German cycle.
Settle, please. Let it settle. You good, Ian?
Yes.
Here we go. And action! I got the inside. One more, that's good. Cut there, cut there.
Yeah, so those were during rehearsals, obviously, with the crew there. Once we had the rehearsals sort of down, we pulled the crew out, hid behind that bunker or in a ditch somewhere or whatever, and we shoot the takes. But what was great is to get all that, that real sound of those real German machine guns. We had some Tommy guns out there that were pretty nice too. It was interesting. Also, Richie Helmer, who's in this shot, he's the guy with the plaid shirt and white hair. He was our pyrotechnician, and we had to find someone who had some street cred. So Richie was the guy who loaded all the gasoline in the plastic bags and then blew them up in the jungle for Apocalypse Now. So he's got a little background. It's pretty good. So he rigged a lot of machine gun fire, the ground hits, things like that. I mean, as much as we were out there with real machine guns, we were using blanks. We were exhibiting a lot of safety concerns. We had any stunt was actually done by a trained stuntman, not one of the reenactors. So that's something to keep in mind too. These aren't student films. You want to treat this stuff seriously, especially when you're dealing with a multi-ton tank that's coming over a wall. So just be cautious. Anyway, so that was the mission, which, like I said, broke some rules in terms of moving the camera, playing with the camera, and also in terms of using the VR to do more of an observer sort of point of view rather than an actual subjective point of view. Which brings us to Kaiju Fury. So our third outing goes back to the Sam Winston School, and what happened with them, you'll notice those little tiny logos at the bottom. Poster there. Kaiju Fury came out of a contest that was happening with Sam Winston School of Air Arts. They sponsored a kaiju. You guys know what kaijus are? Giant monsters, giant Japanese monsters. Godzilla, Rodan, Gamera, all those cool monsters from the 50s and 60s. Actually, they've been making them for quite a while. I mean, it's still made in the 2000s. But we, Matt and me and all the guys associated with the Sam Winston School all grew up loving these movies. And so Matt decided he was going to sponsor a contest where he was going to have people that were subscribers to the Sam Winston School or associated with it could enter this contest to design some giant monsters. And so a couple of people, hundreds of them actually, entered this contest, and based on posting those images, the Sam Winston School audience then voted on their favorites, and they picked 2 giant monsters. And so Sam Winston School did a couple of lessons where they showed how to build these suits. These were like over a 10-day period. 2 monster creators came in and so that's Matt, by the way, screaming on the left, screaming at the black monster, and we got the blue monster on the other side. But these suits were designed by people that submitted these designs, and then they were built by students under the guise of, or leadership of a couple of professionals. So for instance, the black suit was made by Bill Bryan. If you notice Bill's t-shirt, and then it's the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man in New York. Bill was the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. He was actually in the suit and helped build the suit for the Ghostbusters movie. So he came in, led a team building that kaiju, and then Ted Haynes is another visual effects creature artist who came in and built the blue suit, which is this guy over there. And so over a couple of weeks, they built these suits, and while that was happening, Matt grabbed me by the collar, pulled me over and said, "Hey Ian, if we're gonna have giant monsters, don't you think we should have giant monsters destroying a giant or a miniature city?" He said, "Okay." So, because he knows I build models, he decided to wrangle me into building a city that we could have our giant monsters fight in. And that's part of it there. And while he was at it, he said, "Well, we'll do a lesson where you show everyone how to build a miniature city." So I got wrangled into, on camera, teaching people how to build these models. You'll see, so there's these miniature buildings we made. Most of them are made with plaster faces on them so that our monsters could smash them. And like we experienced with the both the Mission and Black Mass, we had to build a 360-degree set because we're going to be shooting with a virtual reality camera, which sees all the way around. So we don't have any, there's no holes in the set. So the set actually It was 360. There were buildings at both ends of the street. Plus we had a mountain. This is actually looking from the mountain back at the city so that it was covered. And of course, I decided we should do it at night, which meant we could avoid seeing the sky or clouds or anything like that. The other thing you do with models is to impart some sort of atmospheric inversion, because right now in this room, we're only a certain number of feet away, but if the giant monster was hundreds of feet away, there would be a little bit of atmosphere between us and the monster, so we shoot in smoke. So you see the smoke in there to kind of give that depth to the scene. And again, we had to deal with lighting issues, so the buildings themselves have lights built into them. There's some street lights, and then our key light, which is our moon, so to speak, was always conveniently behind a building, but still using that smoke as an ambient source to sort of give us our light. That's a little bit closer. There I am with Richie. Richie's hooking up some bullet holes in the street for our monsters to fight. And you can see all of our buildings. We have a subway track here. We have a street level with some cars down there. And if you look in the upper kind of right, there's a jet fighter on wires. The other thing I wanted to do in this was to put every kind of standard giant monster item you would expect to find in there. So there's the city, there's the subway track, there's the jet fighter, there's some tanks that get crushed and shoot at our guys, and also there's our convenient high tension lines that of course spark and everything like that. So everything I remember from these movies, I always put these little elements in and try to mix them in there. One other thing we did, going back to blocking and rehearsing, is that I laid out the whole city in tape on another piece of our stage so that I could take our performers and actually have them act out the whole thing beforehand. And that way because there's a lot of action taking place, and these were still long takes, and so there was a lot of marks they had to hit specifically from place to place. And so I wanted to rehearse them with them a lot, even though I'm trying to direct them, and you'll hear me directing them using a little more later. I really had to rely on them to remember what they were doing most of the time. So, like any good actor, they inhabited their roles really well, and each of them acted slightly different than the other in terms of each monster was a slightly different character, if you can believe it. What's great about this, I'll tell you this much. When they were like not wearing the suits and they were rehearsing first, they looked like ballet dancers. I mean, there was very fluid. Yeah, I take martial arts. And like slapping each other, moving in this beautiful choreographed ballet. Then you put the suits on and we ask them to do the same thing. Frankenstein's creature, and so. But they think there's fluid as hell. But so that was the thing I had to deal with was the limitations of putting someone in a rubber suit and yelling at them constantly to have them try to hit their marks. Especially since the blue suit, it turns out, you couldn't see out of them. And one of the guys, designers, thought it'd be really cool to put some strobe lights in it. So the poor guy, Brian, is inside with strobe lights going off. Didn't have a fit, and suffocating, and then me yelling at him, hit your mark. So those are the kind of things you run into when you make giant monster movies. So again, we worked with, Stan went to school, we built the suits, we built the city. A guy named Dave Masley, who is from Toronto, actually led the team that built the models. And it worked out really well. And let's see what it looked like. A bit more. So there were some live action pieces in there. I really wanted this to be a very typical sort of giant monster movie. So the story is that there's a scientist who's created a power plant. The power plant has torn holes in time and space, drawing giant monsters from different dimensions into our world. And so our beleaguered scientist right here is Susie Aberbite, who played Tamblyn, one of my scientists. The other scientist was, named after, I think it was Nick Adams. So I named all the people after people who were in giant monster movies. But anyway, she's got to go and shut off this power plant. So again, here she is in a set. That lamp over our heads is giving us our practical light. And then we've got this sort of weird purple glowing light from the background that's hidden. And you have it. So that's our live action component, which again, we had the same issues, which is build the set, hide the lighting, and still be able to shoot it with our jaunt system. And now I'm going to show you a couple of clips from shooting these guys in their suits. There's us rehearsing. Yeah, not scared of the guy in shorts.
Especially Brian can't sing, Vince was on fire, so that was really good.
So, yeah, there's nothing more terrifying than yelling at two guys named Vince and Brian to be giant monsters, but it was better than trying to come up with names for them, but at least we knew what their own name was. Kaiju Fury, yeah, we had real sparks, real airplanes on wires, real tanks, real control tanks being smashed by real guys in rubber suits, and it was a lot of fun. And right now we're cutting that together and we're adding visual effects to that. One of the things was that shooting with a miniature, the jaunt system right now, the way the 360 works, the images converge to create the 3D part. But you want to stay outside of about a 4 or 5 foot range for that to be the sweet spot where it works. Now the mission, the mission is actually a couple of shots that take place inside of a tank where we're actually within that line. So that's going to require some hand stitching in order to get those shots to work. And also, of course, you want to sort of know where your primary view is with the camera so you keep your actor from crossing the stitching line. In Kaiju, we had to stay a certain distance back, and also our monsters, if they crossed over the top, there's that vertical line we have to deal with, so that's being stitched out. But the one thing that I found out was that once you got the image completely created and rendered out, you can actually blow it up. And so we were finding that you can actually blow the image up and push in, if you will. So in The mission, for instance, once we did the lock-off, we actually did some virtual dollies inside that space. And in Kaiju, we're going to take all the miniature shots and actually blow them up so that we get a closer distance. Just to give an example, if we're 4 feet away in 24 scale, which is a half inch to the foot, which is the size we did the city, that's 100 feet, 96 feet. It's about 96 feet away. That's further away than you would expect to be, especially if you want to be standing in the middle of the street being attacked by giant monsters. So we're going to blow those images up to be much closer to give you a much closer sense of the monster. The other thing with shooting miniatures, especially guys in giant monster suits, is they don't want to be moving at normal speed. So we're actually going to double the frame rate on the shots with optical flow so that they are slowed down. And if you watch the trailer at the jaunt booth for Kaiju, the monster shots are going to slow down. So that's important because that's what gives us a sense of scale is, an object falling or something moving. If you're dropping something from 4 feet, it's going to take X number of seconds to hit the ground. If it's falling from 96 feet, it's going to take longer. So we have to impart that time difference with the footage by slowing it down so that we have this sense of scale. Well, there you go. That's our 3 little excursions into shooting VR. We're pretty excited about it. We think there's a lot of opportunity for doing narrative content with VR. We're excited to see how much longer you can go on a scene. Right now, these are shorts, it's about 5 or 6 minutes long, but I'm sure they could be longer and longer. The missions, for instance, we think that might lend itself to a serial. So you watch a short version, but you take those same characters, put them in a different environment, different mission, a whole different adventure. Also, this has been live, but both with the mission and with Kaiju, we know that we're going to be integrating some 3D created props and environment. And I think actually tomorrow when you guys hear from the Sleepy Hollow, you guys are going to be Sleeping Beauty virtual reality experience. The Sleepy Hollow guys, the idea of like where do you cross the line, merging CG with live, and because we come from a visual effects background, to us it seemed logical that we would be doing some of that. So, for instance, the mission, that crane that's holding up our parachute, it's a 360 world. So if you look in the right direction, you see it. We've had to paint that out. We've had to do some other fixes in some of these shots in order to complete the immersion experience. So I think adding like tracer fire, adding some cockpits we have to add to Kaiju Fury, those are the kind of things that we're just sort of going to accept doing. And we'd rather go for the shot, we'd rather go for the excitement, we'd rather go for the good storytelling, and then have to deal with the complexity of adding these things than to not do them and come up with lesser content, lesser product. Anyway, do we have any time left? How long have I been talking? Does anyone have any questions about what we've been doing? You, sir.
About audio, are you using binaural audio?
Yeah, we have Avasonic recording off of the John cameras, but we also recorded with on the actors themselves, so we're mixing that together. And then in the case of Kaiju, my screaming through a bullhorn is being completely replaced. In fact, I want to mention these guys. Tim Getterer and Charles Dean at Sound Source are doing a sound mix for us. And Luke Wilson and Doug Roseberg at Simulate are doing the color work. But yeah, it sounds really interesting because while it's great to have the Amazonic sound, like for the mission, a lot of that was all great because we've got machine guns going off and everything makes sense. Kaiju it's completely made up. There's none of it can be used. Yes, sir.
How did you deal with playback on set?
Well, when we were doing the mission, we put, and also also on Kaiju, I hid a bunch of GoPros throughout the set. In the mission, we had a GoPro mounted onto the Steadicam, so we could watch that for real time while we were rolling. But once we were done with that, the DIT from John, after we do a tape, would process it, take a few minutes, and we get a low-res version we could watch right off the bat to make sure we had the tape. But like I said, it's like live action. It's triple the time because you have to wait for the playback to move on. That's how we get the playback. Yes?
In Kaiju Fury, did scale ever become an issue with the size of the camera rig and the size of the miniature?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. The nice thing about the John rig is it's fairly low profile. Like you saw in the pictures, it's fairly compact. And we measured the height of the lens, which off of the bottom of the platform was about 3 inches. And so that's where we came up with the scale half inch to the foot, which that's about 6 feet. It's a little higher than you'd normally put a real camera, but it puts it close enough to the ground so that we're looking from that perspective, it's correct. And a couple of times we would actually wedge the camera up so we sort of artificially put in a little bit of a tilt to make the audience members look up a bit. So in this particular case, the scale was dictated by how low we could get the camera, but the camera was compact enough that we could get a reasonable scale. That made our monsters about 160 feet tall.
And the width of the unit didn't ever...
It's pretty compact. It's about like that. Yeah. I didn't take account of the actual size of the camera when I laid the city out originally. So the city streets were about 8 feet apart because I got to be 4 feet from either side so I don't get too close. But then I had to take account of the actual body of the camera, which was about 1 foot. So the night before we shot, we took all the buildings and moved them out, unscrewed them and had to move them out just to get that much room. There are a few times where we go inside that 4 foot line. There's a couple of times with the monsters snarling at us or reaching at us or whatever. We try to use the primary camera lens for that so we weren't crossing the stitching area. And those instances were worth doing because it actually makes it fairly dramatic. But originally I was very concerned about that distance issue. Like I said earlier, once I realized that, or found out that we could actually in post blow the image up, we could actually sort of effectively change the focal length of the lens and get us closer to the subject, and that made it feel more scary. So, yeah.
Kaiju Fury, was the camera always off top?
A lot of times. There's a couple of movings. There's a dolly shot in that. That was the experience on the mission, which is the mission, we do have a moving camera in the mission. It does require more finesse with stitching. It does help when you're a certain distance away. Because we were so close in proximity to the buildings in Kaiju Fury, we decided to not do as many moving shots. There's a couple of them, but for the most part, they're locked off. So, yeah. Over.
A lot of effort into guide the viewer in some sense of camera production. I don't think that shows much lesson for the rest. To what extent are people that are going in the direction more or less? To what extent are people that know where they want to go?
Good question. The question is how much we're using, or how much are we trying to direct the direction, or the direction of the viewer, and how effective is that? And it's funny because we'll put the headset on people. I don't think anyone in this room is like this, but we've done this at Kamikaze and a couple of these conventions, and we'll say it's a 360 world. You can look all the way around. Okay, we'll put the headset on. We'll look straight ahead, and we'll keep tapping them on the shoulder. You can look around. You can look around. So there is a tendency to want to be able to look around. When we found with, what we found was that to start a shot, to start a scene, you want to give enough head to the shot for the viewer to orient themselves, to look around and see where the space is that they're in. But we also found that once you sort of have established a scene, the viewer doesn't tend to look around the next time they're in the same setting. They kind of know where they are. And if we're doing a narrative, we want to draw their attention to whatever the action is going on. The other thing we found too, in terms of editing, So for instance, in Kaiju, our monster comes in from the right. We immediately cut from that scene to a scene inside of a diner where our scientists are. Well, when we shot the scene with the diner and the scientists, we're looking straight ahead at the scientist. But if we cut directly from that, from our monster who's over here, to our scientist over here, now we have to draw the audience over there. So what we would do in the edit was rotate the scene so that when we're directly cutting from what's drawing our attention to the right from one scene, we then put the center of attention to where we're looking to the next shot. These are things we didn't know about off the bat to do that. We found in the edit we needed to rotate the camera to line up where you were last looking. We're also, of course, the Black Mass mission in Kaiju Fury. I'll use it, but Black Mass especially. Sound is a really important factor in terms of where do you have to look and how do you draw your attention. So for instance, in Kaiju Fury, you open shot, you're looking around the city, there's sirens going off, and then there's a huge explosion. Now that explosion goes, and then a second later something comes out of that explosion, but the explosion's loud enough to draw your attention to where the action is. But it's something you have to establish, it's something you can use to cue people to look the right direction. But I think sound is really important to draw people to watch the story. The other thing too is you'll turn your head all day to watch something, but you really don't want to turn around. As my audio goes out. So if you're going to have some action happening behind you in the scene, you want to start out here and draw the people to it, or use a sound to draw you to it. If you just have random action going on behind you, you don't tend to look over there, although you'll pick up things on your peripheral. So that's what we found also, is that it was really easy to have people looking left and right in an action, less prone to look behind you unless you cue them somehow. And that's where theater and magician, magic tricks come in handy. Use this misdirection, more direction to get people. Okay. You, sir.
You said in Black Mass you used the mask over the camera and light infused to actually lead your cuts. So what about Mission Kaiju? Like what's your thinking now as far as what's natural ending within virtual space?
Yeah, I think both Kaiju and Mission, there's the transition between cuts is done with a bit of black in and out, so that it's not just a direct cut. But actually, I think the cinematic language is that we've been watching movies long enough. We accept cuts happening. So in fact, in Mission, we have one shot where a guy, you see him pull the binoculars up and he adjusts the binoculars. The next cut is the binocular view of a different actor going on. So it's all about the storytelling. In your head, you see a guy putting on binoculars. If you cut to him, you see the binocular view. You don't have to go around through the lens to see the binoculars. You accept the cut because the idea has been put in your head, and then when you see it, you accept what you're seeing. I still think you need enough time to orient yourself in the scene. I still think you need enough, that's the main thing. But I think quick cuts are going to be a little harder to do. But I think regular cutting techniques will work because I think your mind will accept it. As long as you're telling the story ahead of time, as long as you're setting up the gag, I think you can have the payoff and still have a different point of view happening right after the film.